I think it's 5:35, so I think maybe we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening. I'm Susan Jarrett. I think maybe everybody knows me, but I'm a member of the board of the Newport Bay Conservancy, and I'm the leader of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the second in our series of speakers. For our event this evening, we ask that you mute yourselves until the Q&A, but do feel free to use the chat feature to pose questions and make comments, and we'll get to those when we move into that part of the presentation. We're really, really pleased to welcome Eboni Preston, Director of Operations of Atlanta's Greening Youth Foundation, to speak with us this evening. Eboni has multiple degrees from Kennesaw State University, Columbia, and Duke, and has spent the last decade in youth and community development. At present, she's guiding the Greening Youth Foundation, helping them to achieve its mission to engage underrepresented youth and young adults in the outdoors. They offer a cultural-based environmental education program, and she helps these young people to imagine careers in conservation and land management. And I'm sure she'll be saying more about her own path and this group as well. What I also found really impressive about Eboni's bio is the number of public service positions she holds in addition to this amazing job. Just to mention a couple of these, she's a sustainability ambassador for the City of Atlanta's Mayor's Office. She's a member of the Southeast Regional Council for National Parks Conservation Association and the Labor and Industry Chair for the Georgia NAACP. There's much more to say about Eboni, but we want to have as much time as possible with our accomplished guests. Eboni, we really appreciate your willingness to stay up a little later this evening. I know that's in your part of your end of the country, and to share your expertise and your experience with us this evening. So thank you very much.
Of course. And thank you for having me. I'm really honored by the invitation and excited to be in this space with you all and share a little bit about my journey in the organizations that I am a part of. And just want to say that kudos to you all for the work that you do as an organization, but then also the committee and the speaker series. It's really, really cool. And I wish more folks would engage in more conversations because as Marco said, I did get to watch the recording. This is a part of the work. And so there's a lot of good to come from this. And I look forward to engaging with you all in conversation. I will say I'm going to throw a lot in there tonight, and my Southern twang will certainly be there. And so if y'all hear a few too many y'alls or folks, know that it's in good spirit, and I'm just really excited about it. But if you have any questions, as Susan said, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll certainly go through those at the end. But yeah, with that, I will go ahead and get started. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
Awesome. And so, as I said before, just really excited to be here. And as I said, I'm excited that you all got Marcos first, and he got to talk about the barriers and how and why people show up and what that means for the work and for our welfare and the environment and the different layers and levels to that. Really powerful conversation there. And so some of those themes will show up again tonight in what I go through with my deck. And so I'm a social worker by training, so I have to say this is a safe space, but I invite you to really just like lean in and let's have a conversation about it, and would love to hear kind of what comes up for you and ways that we could work together in solving some of these issues and collaborate in creating more opportunities. So with that, I will get started. So as you said, my name is Eboni Preston, and I have the fortune of being able to serve as a director of operations for the Greening Youth Foundation, a nonprofit whose mission is to engage underserved and underrepresented youth and young adults while connecting them to careers in conservation. And I'll add that we got our start because our founder and CEO, Anjulu Ezilo, who many of you may hear, she's serves on a board with Drew here in the Georgia Audubon Society, formerly the Atlanta Audubon Society. But she started in this work after working in law for a number of years and worked with the Trust for Public Land, and just saw that she didn't necessarily have a community. She didn't have a network that she could lean on and build from and grow from. And so she started Greening Youth Foundation with the hopes that she could create more Angelus and Drews, if you will, and just to show what is possible to young people and to diverse professionals looking to grow within the space. So I'll talk a bit more about GYF as the presentation continues, but just wanted to let you know how I show up to the space. So here I've noted the boards, regional councils, and executive committees that I've sent on. And so I feel it important to really talk through this stuff, as this is a part of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. So with the Next 100 Coalition, we have an inclusive vision for the next 100 years to see equity and inclusion in conservation and stewardship. With other members of the board, as well as organizations that have membership, we show up as advocates, drivers for policy and equity within those policies, and really to use our resources to make sure this isn't just talked about, that change isn't just talked about, but that it's actually happening. I also serve on the board with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, a national scenic trail that runs from Georgia to Maine. And here I'm able to take part in educational and equitable programming as I serve on the conservation and advancement committees. With MPCA, I'm a part of the regional council in the Southeast region, where we serve in an advisory capacity to help staff on local campaigns and work for about 7 states. Here locally to Atlanta, I'm a member and trustee with the Georgia Conservancy, where we are actively working and protecting Georgia through ecological and economic solutions for stewardship, conservation, sustainable use of land and its resources. And finally, I'm with Georgia NAACP, as Susan shared, where I serve as the labor and industry chair for the state conference. And here we look for ways to improve the socioeconomic status of minority groups by addressing social injustices, discriminatory practices in industry and government, as well as wage differentials and unequal opportunities for training and promotion and dismissals. So that's a lot, right? But then I'll add, and I won't go through all of these as I did with the last one, but these are some of the standing meetings and partners and initiatives that I'm a part of due to my work with the GYF and the positions that I just shared. So with the Georgia Mountains Children's Forest, we create opportunities for diverse young Georgians to experience and explore the national forest in their backyard. By enhancing and expanding programs, the network has been able to cultivate understanding of public lands and foster participation in the care of those lands. And so through the network, we've been able to host a series of events throughout the year, such as the Forest for Every Classroom, that's geared towards local educators, and the Next Generation Forest Ambassadors, which, as the name implies, engages and equips students to become stewards, ambassadors, and leaders within the national forest system. With the Outdoor Future Fund, which is a little bit closer to you all, this is an equity initiative that aims to build momentum in addressing systemic barriers to nature and the outdoors that exist for youth in our country. The creation of this fund was done to ensure large-scale, long-term, secure investment in programs across the nation to serve our youth through meaningful outdoor recreation and nature-based education experiences. Under the Conservation Network, I take part in the Indian Youth Service Corps, serve as a steering committee member for the Public Land Service Coalition, and work within the Corps Communication Group so that the network of over 100 corps across the country, we can collectively work to discuss, work through, and then solve some of the issues and opportunities for advancement. And then I'll end here and say that with partners like the Partnership for Southern Equity, the City of Atlanta, and South Phase, we have a number of meetings and programs on how to actually include the community in intervention, workforce development, education support, and resource distribution. So, unfortunately for me, with all of that, it has allowed me in spaces like this and to speak to different groups on workforce development, programming, DEI, emotional intelligence, green jobs, cultural competence, and intercultural awareness. And a big part of that is my call, as I say, to action and advocacy. So that was a lot. And my husband and my family remind me of that all the time, especially when all that work translates into 40 and 50-hour work weeks. But I really want to take the time to make sure I explain why I do it and share why I felt it necessary, because I still do. I've been in this work for quite some time, but while I feel it's necessary to be engaged in so many different ways. So we'll start with the Greening Youth Foundation, or as I said, GYF. I shared our mission before, but I'll add that we have a long history of working with diverse youth and young adults in an effort to develop environmental stewards, promote environmental education, and provide services and internship opportunities that create pathways to careers in conservation. So we got our start about 15 years ago in an environmental education space. So we were working in the metro Atlanta area. And as I said, our founder and CEO, Anjulu, she just wanted to create spaces for diverse young people and emerging professionals. So she got our start with our environmental education program, which we still have today. And it's really about teaching young people about the environment and stewardship, but also nutrition and wellness. So while it's really important and really cool for me to have a kindergartner, for example, really understand what composting is and what recycling is and why that's so important, it's also important for me that they have ownership of those terms and what that means so that they can become environmental stewards. And so just thinking, if that 5-year-old or 10-year-old or 15-year-old has these practices and is really thinking about this work when they become adults, what that could look like. So that's really, really important. And then the other component of that is nutrition and wellness, and that we want these young people to understand what it is that they're eating. And so knowing that that's a process and not necessarily going to fast food restaurants as they do out here for quick bites, but saying, hey, like, let's understand what we're eating, what goes into this process, and how we can be a little healthier overall. So really, really cool program. The kids are also really cute, but it's just an opportunity to start them early and get them exposed to as much as possible. One of the really cool programs that we have that kind of emerged out of this department is our Legacy Campout. So this is from 2019. We do it every year at the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park. And what we do is invite a number of educators, community partners, obviously the National Park Service, but students from around the state, or at least the Metro Atlanta area, invite them to camp out for the night, right? So we have tents and s'mores and we go on tours. We sit on bales of hay and we just have fun. And for them, it could be their first time experiencing camping in the outdoors. Now, granted, it's an urban park, so they aren't, hiking. They're driving up to a local parking lot and kind of camping out there. But it's really about that first experience for them and showing them what is possible and how they can really have fun in the outdoors. Our next department is our Youth Conservation Corps. And Greening Youth Foundation brought me in here. I actually started as a program manager, but I was a program manager under YCC. And I think this department is really, really cool in that it is showing young people who maybe they're in college or they've recently graduated or they're in graduate school or maybe they just want to change in career, but that there is opportunity for them to work in this environmental space. So we have the good fortune of being able to work with a laundry list of federal agencies like National Park Service and Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, heard Fish and Wildlife Service earlier. But in that work is showing them, one, that there's space for them to be there and we invite them to that space, but then also they could be a leader. I know for me, before coming to Greening Youth Foundation, I had been to national parks and I lived a very outdoorsy lifestyle, if you will, but had no idea that it was a part of a larger system that I could be a part of, that I could work for, that I could be a leader in. So what we do right now is to really expose youth and young adults to the opportunities here within the sector and help to groom them. So cultivating that talent, whether it be through professional development, whether it's connecting them with mentors and coaches, connecting them with each other, providing them with tools and resources and training, whatever it is to help them kind of make that trajectory to being a leader is what our goal is here. And so this is a picture from one of our internships programs, HBCUI, where we're targeting historically Black colleges and universities and getting students and recent graduates from there and sending them to parks over the course of the summer. So this is from the Brown v. Board of Education. Clearly, this was a pre-COVID picture and how close everyone is. But folks are working in Topeka, Kansas, and got to do a lot of cultural work. So it's really cool that the National Park Service, for example, has a lot of cultural resource management as well as natural resource management, and that we're showing the young people that there's opportunities within both spaces. So here is our Urban Youth Corps. So in 2014, our internship program, let me back up, started in 2009. And we started with just 4 interns. And that's so crazy because in a little over 10 years, we've literally had thousands of interns go through our program. So we're very fortunate there. But our Urban Youth Corps program was for young people, typically local to Atlanta, where we're based, that don't traditionally have the 2 or 4 year degree. And so we said, that doesn't mean that you can't be a leader in this space. That doesn't mean that you can't engage here. So what we did was create our Urban Youth Corps, and we based this programming at a 4-acre farm that we have in Atlanta called our Urban Conservation Training Institute, and just really equipping these young people to be successful in that space. And so that's everything from urban agriculture to horticulture, silviculture, animal husbandry, equipping them with those technical skills, but then also soft skills. So they're doing things like financial literacy, they're getting industry credentials, they get to do special assignments like tree care management and fire management. So it's a lot of really good work there that creates opportunity for them. But again, the same mission as it is with our internship program is to show them that there are possibilities and expose them to as much as possible. So this is a picture of one of the crews that got to work at the Alonzo Herndon home here in Atlanta. So one of the first Black millionaires from the state. And so while they were working on historic preservation here of his home and making sure they preserve his legacy, they were also working on a project that was very important historically, and I mean structurally, to the community. And so there's, again, that kind of representation in kind of taking that all in and what it can mean as we do with the young people, as I said, with our Forever Green program, just to show that who you are and how you show up in your legacy is really, really important. So the fact that they got to literally preserve the home, but then help at the same time to preserve Alonzo Herndon's legacy is really, really important and something special. And so we try to make sure that we combine both of those efforts and letting them know what's going on and how they can give back and show leadership in that space. And then finally, I want to talk to you all about the Bridge Project. So as many of you may know, the conservation field can be hard to break into, and employers across the sector, from federal land management agencies to environmental NGOs, sometimes struggle to connect with talented, diverse pool of potential candidates. That being said, hiring pathways need to be more consistent and replicable, and they need to be cleared of barriers that have traditionally worked to keep underrepresented candidates from finding employment, permanent employment and jobs in conservation. So as a team, we created the Bridge Project to do just that. We engaged employers and candidates and partners to create an inclusive and innovative hiring pathway. This was a couple weeks ago, it was May 11th and 12th. We expected about 300 participants and ended up with nearly 700. And I can proudly say that about a couple dozen of emerging professionals and young leaders will start their permanent positions in the coming days. So we're very excited about this work and what's to come. We'll have another Bridge Project in September. And so certainly this is something we can continue to talk about, but it's been a really good opportunity for folks to get their start within the conservation space. And so to go back to that why slide and why I immediately went to GYF, I want to say that folks like me or even Marcos and maybe the next speaker that you have, we do this work because we have to. You know, for me, I see it in the students. As I said, I got to start as a program manager with Green Youth Foundation, and so I'm really tied and connected to the work. So when I see pictures like this of Sydney, and I think about her first time and the other Sydneys of the world, right? And their first time being able to go to and recreate and work at places like Yosemite, that's really, really powerful. And then I also think about the Sahas and her getting her first chance to do something different from her family. It's like they all had that one path. And I know so many friends that say that, well, I have to go to this school to be a doctor. I have to go to this school to be a lawyer. I had the same example or narrative growing up. So it's really cool for young people to be able to get into that first space. And then I think about the Alexes of the world that say and really mean, I want to be a leader and I want to stand out within my community and do something different as far as this is what we're expected to do. So they want to break that stereotype and bias that may come there. And then I think about the Kellys that see the value in reconnecting her community to the land. And it's such a beautiful picture. This is taken in Durango, Colorado. I actually took this picture myself, but just showing and hearing Kelly talk about what the forest meant to her and how she can engage her school friends and her cousins and mom and aunties and all those other folks and just kind of bring them to the space is really, really powerful. But on another note, it's for the educators that say we know there's more learning and teaching to do and their willingness to be a part of that change. It's also for friends and partners that are in the work and continue to tirelessly work to move the needle. And then most importantly, at least for me, it's for the next generation of underrepresented little girls and boys in this space to know what is really possible. And all of this collective work is a part of the work, as Marco said, and it's a matter, it matters just as much as talks around climate change and conservation and sustainability. I've learned very quickly that there are so many systems and policies and traditions that create and cause barriers, and it takes a collective effort to dismantle them as we work towards creating pathways to environmental stewardship and leadership. And with all that being said, I hope you all can see that this is serious work and I have a lot of passion and hope and determination for it. And it's so funny, I have to bring this up that I often get asked all the time by our students or our partners on why I decided to work in the environmental space. And some say that this path seems very linear, like things make sense and why I chose to do what I do, or that, you know, there was some type of natural progression there and how lucky I am to have known what I wanted to do from the beginning. And I always have to laugh because it's so far from the truth. As I said before, you're here, Mark Twain. I've grown up in very small towns between Georgia and Virginia with super humble beginnings and a limited view of the world. And I had no idea that any of this was possible or that the environment was anything for me to even care about, if I'm being honest. I had dreams and goals. And as I said before, with that shared narrative, I went to school to study biology and to become a doctor. And since that time, I've had my fair share of studies and career shifts. But I will say that along the way, a bunch of someones, if you will, gave me a chance. And so I feel it personal to do this work for others and sitting within the positions that I hold with GYF and the different boards to make sure that I'm affording that same opportunity for young people. So fortunately or unfortunately, it does take all of this to serve and to be intentional and to be a part of the change and a part of new narratives and norms and leadership. But as you can see from the smiling faces in the pictures, I really, really think it's worth it. So I rushed through that because I really want to, if you all have questions and talking about programs, what that could look like and how we unpack that and how we can partner and see change. I love sitting in presentations and just learning. I'm a lifelong learner, but I also know that it's very timely and we don't have the luxury of time. So if you all had questions on how we can do the work, what are changes we can make now, even on an individual level, I would love to engage in that and talk through that and maybe offer some solutions and problem solve that information together, if that's okay, Susan.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course.
That was really, it's just staggering the number of projects and organizations that you've got going there. It's the scale is so much larger than ours, but so I think there's so much we can learn. So yeah, thank you very much. Let's see if there are questions. Yeah, Randall, did you want to start us off here?
Yes, please. It's going to be kind of long-winded. Bear with me.
Okay.
Understanding that one barrier to people coming out and visiting the Upper Newport Bay is people don't see people like themselves. It's almost a monoculture. I had the thought that one way that we could address this is we have naturalist training, 12-week program in the natural history of the Upper Newport Bay. At the end of it, you get a certificate from OC Parks and California Fish and Wildlife. I had the thought of giving a grant to members from the BIPOC community to come out, take our training, and it really be trust-based. Come take the training and take the information back to your community. Apply it best as you know, because obviously I wouldn't know how to apply it to the community. My problem is making the connection and getting candidates or organizations or help. Again, really trust-based. I would reach out to any organization that say, yes, we can help find you some candidates. And this is where I'm stuck. And if you could share either in the chat or a follow-up in email, maybe some organizations that I could reach out to with this type of question. If you could fine tune how I should approach this, throw me a lifesaver. I really need help here. I think the idea, well, it's my idea. Of course, I think it's good. But in general, what I read, this is one area, and it seems to be a lot of what you're doing is in the same, developing leaders. And I'd like to take a small step in that direction. So I'll quit rambling on and let you all take over.
Well, Randall, I think that's really good. And I appreciate you starting there. And I will tell you, you are not the only person to bring up that kind of dilemma, right? And so if I can, I do have resources. I will say, one, just a plug for my CEO's book, Engage, Connect, Protect. And that literally the back half of her book is a laundry list of resources. And I can put that in the chat, but it's a laundry list of resources of organizations, community organizations that are led by BIPOC groups and that are interested in the space. So if that's for internships, if that's for just kind of working on and doing exploratory programs, whatever that looks like, but they're there. And it's a national repository of information, if you will. So that's it, Susan. Exactly. Perfect. I will have to share that with Anjali. But the back half is just that. It's a ton of resources. And so we made sure we took the time to put all of that in there. So people saying, where do I go? Where do I look? Now you have a book that houses it. And of course, organizations. So that list is growing, right? So more organizations needed to be added. So I told her that means she's on the hook for a second book. But yeah, I would invite you to start there. But two other things that I wanted to share was that one, at least what I know from my own experience. And like I said, I've been in this work, especially with these BIPOC groups and just kind of bringing people to the table. I know that you have an amazing idea. I hear it. I see the passion behind it, and that matters 100%. But I would also kind of push you to maybe invite those partners to the table as you're formulating those ideas, right? And so what this could look like. And so it's not a conversation of, hey, I have this phenomenal opportunity, I want to invite you to it, but say, hey, I have these resources. Let's sit down and have a conversation about what this could be together. Like, what are you interested in? What do you want people to come out to see and be exposed to so that they can take these resources back and they can create this leadership or stewardship or whatever the end goal is there together, but you're making that journey and transition together, because then there's buy-in from their end, right? And so it's not an issue of, well, Randall wants me to call these organizations. It's a matter of, hey guys, let's go. Because we know that they have a really cool program and we're invested and this is what we're all going to get out of it. And I guarantee you'll see a different spirit, because people just want to feel like they're a part of the process and not just being called and leaned on because they have diverse people. But I think it's really cool. And I will be happy to talk to you about some orgs that are out there doing some work, or, you know, just getting young people in the space.
Randall, we have some school districts around Newport, Santa Ana, Costa Mesa, and so on, that have a different ethnic composition to Newport, and we have interacted with them in the past in bringing kids into naturalist training from those districts. We could try harder on that too.
Yeah, definitely. That makes me think of the moment when you were talking about interacting with educators, and it sounded as though is GYF, do they prepare things like curricular materials that they deliver to teachers at various levels, or how does that work exactly?
Sure, good question. So we have a curriculum that we do for our environmental education program, and then what we do for the teachers is we invite teachers of all subjects to come together and we talk through what the introduction of this material could look like. So typically it's around like narratives and how you present information and making sure that it's culturally relevant, because we found that that really matters, especially here in Georgia, and just making sure that it's empowering and it's truthful, and young people are getting multiple perspectives in that work. So it's our force for every classroom, but we literally have from gym teachers to math teachers and science teachers and kindergarten teachers and folks that are just volunteers at the school. And so it's really important that we're equipping them with this general knowledge and new perspective of how to approach public land and how that work can, one, be incorporated. Because I know for me, as I said, I was an outdoorsy kid and I was in small town Virginia. So all of us were outdoors. We didn't talk about this stuff. We didn't talk about what was possible. And so one, just saying, hey, here's an opportunity to have that conversation. So certainly, Susan, there's some themes that we can share that we make sure that we go over with teachers, but because they are coming from a number of backgrounds and fields, we want to make sure that, it's relevant to each of them.
Oh, that's just fascinating. I guess you have to really think of it in what I would call like an interdisciplinary way. The application of these possibilities and these structures that exist. And yeah. I don't want to dominate here. So other questions? For Eboni?
Hi there, I have a question.
Hi.
Sorry I joined a little bit late. I'm Randall's daughter. As I'm sure you can tell from the name, maybe the face. I wondered if you could touch a little bit on power sharing and how that could look in the context of learning, an organization learning to hold the mirror up to itself and recognize the power it retains and how it can effectively share that power, but not necessarily in a parent-child dynamic of I decide when I share the power, but to truly create that level of communication that makes it like a two-way street.
Sure. And so Megan, I'm going to also put my social work hat on right now. And so if I am not answering the question in the way that you're looking for me to answer, stop and I'll shift, because I'm thinking about this in multiple ways, right? So when I think about an organization and I think about our partners and our network, we make, you hear that saying of you don't want to be in the room where you're always the smartest person. GYF kind of feels the same way. And so I would offer that to other organizations in saying, it's okay to be in the room and not be the subject matter expert in everything. And so I think that allows for there to be a system of check and balances that allows for us to see that we still have some learning to grow, that allows for there to be this humility in the space. Because if we are in rooms like with a lot of the spaces that I've entered into where I'm the first or the only one that's there, it's a lot of the same conversations and there's not a lot of change and the dynamics are just what they are because that's a part of the culture. And so I say it's really important to have connection with and to work with different people, different groups. Some of the organizations that we work with, it makes no sense. You'd be like, what? How did you all get connected? But we see that it's a part of the journey in advancing this work and moving the needle. So one, I think it's important, and I have this conversation with a lot of leaders of organizations or even within National Park Service, is to one, first understand who you are. So as you said, putting that mirror up and really taking the time to understand the culture and how people show up and how people have conversation and how people have really serious conversations, but then how people just kind of have fun, or, how people hang out in their spare time, or what does that look like, what that balance looks like. And then after understanding that, look for organizations that are different or partners that are different, or seeing how people show up, or even if they're in the same space, understand how they show up to that space. I think that really matters and is important into growing and learning and thriving and staying relevant and being sustainable as an organization, but then also as people. I hope that answered it, but if not, I'm completely open to taking another stab at it.
No, that was wonderful. I should say I worked at the Packard Foundation up in the Bay Area. So I think about these questions all the time, and it's always a really wonderful opportunity when I can ask a subject expert on these things. So thank you.
Absolutely. Very, very cool. One of the conversations or messages that I give a lot, whether it's to our partners or our interns, is emotional intelligence. And boy, oh boy, when I said, hey, I want to work in conservation and I have a degree in social work, never did I think that I was going to make this connection. Now, I've soon learned that it's so many spaces for me to make that connection with social work in this environmental space. But I would say that the thing that comes up the most often is emotional intelligence and how we show up and how that spills over into our organization. So good for you. And thank you for bringing that to light.
I love that. It reminds me of an op-ed piece that I was reading by a guy named Tim Egan, I think. He's a journalist who often writes about the environment. And he was saying, you know, you have to fall in love with a place or a species or whatever it is that you're going to be involved in. And it seemed a little, I don't know, a little sentimental maybe, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that it really is necessary to have that kind of bond. So one of the things that I've observed in this organization is, as Peter was saying, we bring students out, we bring high school students out, and then we've been bringing some younger kids out too lately, and they come with their science class and they have a one-day, visit. And for some of them, so we're right on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, and then these are some communities that are east of us. And for some of them, they've never been to the ocean before, about an hour trip away. And they think it's pretty cool and interesting, but it's a one-time event. And so we've had some conversations about what can we do next, and how can we, is there a way to attract the families of these visitors, or what could be the next steps? And I wonder if you've ever been in a situation like that, or have any ideas for us about where to go from that first, really good contact.
Yeah, that's a really good one too. And it's the same thing that we were dealing with our legacy camp out, in that it's a first for some. And so I'll speak through that experience, and then I'll also speak to the follow-up. So I'll say for that first engagement, if you will. So if you have more first with folks, you got to treat it like a first date, right? So first impressions matter. And so I say just really being intentional with that time, be intentional with partnerships, being intentional with programming. So for our legacy camp out 2019, I mean, Green East Foundation, we've been doing those camp outs. We talk to youth all the time. We know what we're doing when it comes to those events. We brought in 40 partners to house that event for one night. We didn't need 40 partners, but it was important that we had 40 partners. And I say that because we had local representatives, we had teachers, we had Cub Scout leaders, we had REI, we had Columbia Sportswear, we had a local vendor that cooked the food that they knew, we had the park rangers, we had the maintenance staff. But we really wanted to make sure that there was representation and that they could see themselves, they could see their family members, they could see their friends, everyone in that space. Because while it was a headache, it was so necessary, right? In that the coordinating and logistics was a nightmare, planning up to it. But then when everything just fell into place, you're like, okay, I see why. And so they were excited about it. And, the kids came excited, but then we also had volunteers and chaperones, which were the teachers and the parents and the older siblings and things like that. But we made sure that they had an active role. They weren't just standing there. We're like, no, like you put up the tent too, like let's work. And it was an enjoyable experience for everyone. So I would just say finding an intentional role for everyone is really, really important, in making sure that they're engaged in that space. And then I say for those follow-up, just making sure that there's follow-up and kind of meeting people where they are. So I'm a sucker for some good data. So sometimes surveying people and see what went really well, what didn't. If that has to be a phone call, if it's a survey itself that's sent out through email, but maybe just one time being very intentional about getting that information back from people And I know that we have the passion behind it, or we think it's really cool, but understanding what it is that they need or what they want and translating that into the program helps a lot. And then also what the in-betweens look like, right? So maybe you only have one in-person event. Well, hopefully this grows, but thinking about COVID time, but maybe you have one big in-person event. And then in the interim, maybe there's webinars or some things that you can do on your own, or just, hey, here's a friendly reminder of other things that you can do in your backyard or in your community. So just giving people ideas to kind of continue the work on their own. But again, that steers back to making sure that the first time that you get with them is very intentional and that they feel equipped and prepared, or even just a little less intimidated to do it themselves.
Yeah, those are excellent ideas. These visits they're pretty well, they're education focused in one part, and then the students do have outrigger canoeing experiences. So of course they love that. It's really a lot of fun, and Drew can speak to that. He's one of our excellent leaders of the outrigger experiences, but they tend to wander a bit when it gets to the land-based educational presentation, and then it really is a kind of one-off. I mean, I'm not sure what the teachers do with that experience in their curriculum later, and then the kinds of things you were talking about all have to do with sort of beyond just the educational experience, but more with the contact and a future relationship with the environment. So those are great. Lots of good ideas.
And I'll say too, like sometimes, I mean, websites or social media, whatever the platform that media looks like, that can also be a resource. So it's not a bad thing to be the place, even if digitally, where people go to just to find out what's possible or what's next, right? So if you know that it's going to be a one-time thing, having a repository of information that people can access and see and learn from, or maybe there's a recording of Drew doing the work, like, just having it, making it accessible for people when they're ready, I think is a really cool thing to do too.
Yeah, those are great ideas. Thank you. Who else do we have? Drew, did you want to chime in on this at all, or? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Susan, I'm not really sure what kind of a contribution I can make here.
Oh. Well, I thought of you during Eboni's presentation when she was talking about the various different ways people come into situations, and some of them come in with a kind of idea that they want a sort of package or a bundle of knowledge, and others have a looser or more maybe experiential sense. And it reminded me of what you often say about being an interpreter, is that people want a good story, and I think of you as the master of the good story.
I'll give you a story. I hope it turns out good. I don't know. With the outriggers, those are programmed for high school kids. On occasion, we have college with basically high school kids, and we treat it, and they think of it as a classroom experience outside of the classroom. We do talk. I usually talk to the teacher that comes out with them, with the students, and I ask her what she wants me to emphasize in my presentation. And then once I know what that is, I know which way to go. And some of these kids have heard something they've never heard about the Back Bay, because it is an unusual environment. I mean, we have plants living in salt water, and these are land plants, and that in itself is kind of unusual. And we talk about some things that perhaps they don't know that much about. We talk about the phytoplankton, zooplankton, and I know they're paying attention because they're very quiet. So some of these people, as Susan, I think you mentioned, who are north of us or east of us, have never been out to the ocean or ocean type water as the estuary is. This is an experience for them. And it's all for free, and it's away from the school day. It's a kind of a mini vacation. But they are attentive, they do pay attention. And I always ask them some questions to make it sound legitimate. And I tell them that I have a prize for them. That's a brand new Lexus SUV, which I never have. They're not disappointed. At the end, we do have some fun, of course. You don't go out to a back bay and just listen to text. So we do have some fun at the end. They like to race the outriggers. Sometimes we have two going at the same time. And they like to race against their buddies. But they do sometimes ask interesting questions. On occasion, I don't have an answer. So I told them ahead of time that if I don't have an answer for one of your questions, I'm just going to make something up and make it sound plausible. They think that's kind of funny. I'm tired of saying it, so I won't be saying that anymore. But we have different kinds of students. Most of them are 11th and 12th graders. Sometimes the principal comes out, and they all have to row. It's teamwork. The outrigger will not move. We're not allowed to have boats out. I mean, the motors out there. And we don't have sailcloth. We just have people with paddles, and that is it. And we also have mud spits that they can be quite dangerous, and they're aware of that. And a lot of these things are very, very interesting to them. It's like, I mean, where do you go to get an outrigger experience? I really don't know. It's just where we do it. So it's a very good program that one of us started. It wasn't me, of course. I'm just a participant. But we do talk about things, nature of the estuary. And my first question is, and maybe this is a good question for all of you, why is it an estuary? Why is it a pond? Well, you have to have two kinds of waters to make it an estuary. One of those is called freshwater, and the other one is, thank you, Ebony, saltwater. You're right. I knew you were going to say that. But if you're missing one of those components, you don't have an estuary. You have a freshwater pond or a salty bay. So that's very, very important. They've never heard of some of this stuff. So it's really an experience. And a person like me, who's a leader out there, tour guide, it's a pleasure to do this, introduce kids to something they've never heard of before. And we do have, Ebony, you're in Georgia, I believe, right?
Correct.
Yeah, we're in Orange County, and it's mostly white people. We do on occasion have some Hispanics that join us, and on occasion we have some Blacks as well. And they all have pretty much the same kind of a question, and they're kind of inquisitive. And I can't really say, well, these people have more interest in this, these people have more interest in that. That's not true. That's not the way it works. And we all have a good time, though. And they know that they have to be, whoever you are, you have to be a team member to keep the boat moving. You gotta haul your weight literally in those boats. That's the only way we move around, is because you're shoving water around in the proper direction. Now, I've had people outside of the school system who didn't want to do that. So I had to kind of bark at them. I said, ladies, gentlemen, we're going no place unless everybody move some water. That is the only way we make it out here. And there's about 3 of them that didn't pay any attention to me. They said, well, you know, we got some guys who let them do it. So we finally made it. But anyway, it's a pleasant experience. It's always good to be with a younger set, because generally you can talk to them and they would not know or never heard of what you're saying anyway. So it's something new to them. And in a way, they show their thank you for being out here with us. So I enjoy it, and I think they enjoy it as well. At least I hope so.
Yeah, Drew, that's awesome. And I'll get to say that another really cool part of my job is that I get to, we talked about these community partnerships in the book that Susan shared, and all those resources in the back. We know about those organizations because we visit with those organizations. There's months throughout the year where our office is completely empty because we're traveling across the country. You know, in 2020 even, we were still having operations in 38 states and 2 US territories. So there's literally young people and organizations and folks everywhere that are doing the work. And I can share with you, Drew, that just having those moments and creating the space for those young people to dig in and learn, whether they fight you or not, they're still taking something away from it. But it's just creating that access and opportunity for them to get something out of it matters so much. Because sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And that's been a barrier in itself. So I'm excited that there's people like you in place, and you in particular, in place that's able to teach them and help them grow and kind of see what is possible. So thank you for that.
Megan, did you want to ask something else? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. In my experience with, any sort of outdoor activity, it feels like there's a really, there's a lot of buy-in, like paying for the parking permit, paying to get into national parks, paying for the gear. Like, I'm very lucky I have a parent who can give me their hand-me-downs, but that's not totally common. So I'm wondering how that can be addressed, how you and your organization have addressed that. It feels like it's a really large barrier to clear.
You are so right. Oh my goodness, it's so expensive to do some of this stuff. And as you said, it's definitely a barrier. But fortunately for us, we've been able to have very transparent conversations with a lot of the partners that we have. And so when we think about the national parks, you saw the picture of Sydney. Sydney worked in Yosemite, and literally 3/4 of her internship was spent in a tent. And she was moving from Georgia. She went from UGA. And so to have to move out to California and then get a tent and then get a rain jacket and then have like all of the things that you need to be comfortable and safe and dry and all of those things, right? What does that look like? How do we do it? So what it is, we make sure that we have very honest conversations with the host supervisors for our programs and say, hey, what's needed? And then have a conversation with the student. Hey, what do you have? What do you need? And then if they say, I don't have X, Y, and Z, we say, make a list. And so what we do is we partner with folks like Columbia and Patagonia and Keene and Wilder Goods, the list goes on, and we have a gear drive. And so every year we're collecting literally thousands of pounds of gear for the students. And then what we do is when they say they need it, we send it to them. Like, no questions asked. We know what the supervisors say. We know where they are. We know that they really need a jacket because it's freezing in Alaska, or they really need a rain jacket because it won't stop raining in Florida, whatever that looks like, but we're providing it to them. So it's not something that they have to think about, and it's quality stuff, right? We know that a lot of these brands, they have good stuff and it's not ripped, but just to say that there's a sense of pride when that young person can show up to the space and say, hey, like I'm look like and I'm equipped just like everyone else. And nobody has to know that this was sent to them or things like that. So we make it a point to be able to provide that resource. And we've seen the difference that can make just kind of in confidence. People don't want to feel like they're the one without, right? And as you said, this world is really, really expensive. So if it's a part of the uniform, or as I said, just additional gear that they have, we make sure that we send that to them free of charge.
That's great, Megan. Thank you so much for asking that question. That's really an important one, definitely. Yeah. So, what do we have more questions for? Yeah, Randall, did you want to?
I just shared in the chat to everyone. This is something that Peter had pointed out before, railstothetrails.org.
Mhm.
And their vision is access to the national parks and other types of parks. And this is something that we were thinking the Conservancy could support.
Great. Thanks for suggesting that. Yeah, we're just.
Peter suggested it. I'm stealing his thunder.
Right. One of our objectives is making alliances with other organizations, and your presentation has really shown what could be possible there, on a really major scale. So, yeah, we'll start a little smaller, but this is great. So we're getting to the end of our hour. I want to make sure everyone has a chance to pose a question to Eboni or make a comment. Are there any other?
I'd just like to make a comment about how we could make more use of Zoom in partnering with other organizations. I mean, we could much more easily have joint meetings with other organizations not necessarily even local ones, but other organizations that have the same kinds of philosophy that we do. We should think about that one of these days and decide if, if we can identify some other organizations that we could partner with that way. Zooming makes it possible. Right? We can share a lot of talks that were difficult to share before we started Zooming.
Exactly. Thanks for mentioning that. We've been thinking about partnering sort of locally with organizations that are that have more diverse constituencies. For example, Orange County Environmental Justice. But this is a really good idea to find sort of people with sort of parallel circumstances, in terms of the size, the resource, the and then the challenges where they are. So yeah, that's great. I thank you, Eboni, so much for your presentation, for spending your time with us. This has been really, really helpful, and it's really given us a really grand vision. I mean, what you guys are doing is quite amazing. So impressed, and I'm so happy that you shared the information and the energy and the vision that I think we can really draw on in our next steps here. So so thank you so much.
Of course. And as I said, I was honored to get the invitation. I'm so appreciative of the work and the opportunities and the chances that you're creating for people to enter into the space and just learn. I think that's really cool and it's really important. So keep doing that. Feel free to use me as a resource. So as we talk about what ifs and what's possible and things that are out there, I'm happy to talk through some of that stuff, as I think it's really, really important. And the goal with any nonprofit is to work yourself out of a job, right? So we want to create as much exposure and accessibility to as many people as possible. So I'm happy to go on that journey with you all.
Great, thanks so much. We'll definitely take advantage of that offer, and thank you, NBC participants. I really am so glad that you came. We have several past presidents and lots of kind of key people in our organization, and I'm so glad that they got a chance to hear your presentation this evening. So I guess this is good night. And again, thank you, and thank you for staying up. And this was really, really helpful. And thank you guys for coming. And you'll be able to, yes, a round of applause for Eboni, definitely. And thanks so much. Good night, everybody.